Hi, it's Paul Banis, the GreatDad.com, and thank you very much for joining either the podcast or the YouTube version of the podcast. I'd really appreciate it if you took just a second to subscribe either on your podcast app or in YouTube. It doesn't really do anything. It's not going to send you any emails. It's just going to show up more often on your feed, and it does me a lot of good in terms of getting more exposure for this work I do to support dads. I'd also like to invite you to come to my page, GreatDad.com/go, if you'd like to discuss more about any of the issues that we are covering within the podcast, especially if there's any way I can help you to be a sounding board in your own struggles to be a dad and to be there for your family. So take a look at that. It also includes a link to my course on gratitude, where at GreatDad.com/gratitude with a offer to take that course for free. So see you in a second. Hey, it's Paul Banis with GreatDad.com, and I'm here with my weekly series talking to modern fathers and trying to get the lay of the land. And we've covered the subject before, but I think we should always kind of keep coming back to it. We're going to talk about autism today with an autism advocate, John Felageller. So welcome, John.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so you've got a lot of experience in education, 20 plus years, maybe even 30 years. But the biggest experience in your life that relates to this is your own experience with an autistic child. So maybe we should start there, just to explain what your path has been and why this is so important to you as a advocate rather than just as a as a concerned parent.
Absolutely. So, whenever I speak to a group or do an interview like this, I can identify in many ways. I can identify as a former educator for almost 20 years. I can, identify as an advocate or someone who works in disability ministry specifically, and that's, kind of more my day job. But I specifically identify first and foremost as a father of a child with a disability. So my son Chris or Christopher is 16. He is autistic. He is also nonverbal. He is, if you want to know where on the spectrum he falls, it's probably more towards the severe end, meaning there really isn't anything that he can do independently, right? And he's currently actually living at a residential facility out in Wichita, Kansas, because unfortunately while he had a pretty good experience with his public school environment and special ed room and that kind of thing, he had a really bad year this previous year, and it really forced us to kind of make a different choice for him. So he's there for a season. It's not a forever thing. But it is a choice, unfortunately, families like mine have to make where, if you have a typical child, you think about, well, they're going to get up and go off to college someday. In our case, ours left a little bit early, but it was really out of necessity because the environment just couldn't meet his learning needs. So yeah, we did make that decision for right now. And again, that is one choice that families like ours have to wrestle with, and even more specifically, what parents and dads have to deal with, and what that means for their families and their marriages.
So he's your only child?
Yes, correct.
So I've heard that parents usually have an inkling that something is different almost when the baby is born. Was that your experience that this was something that was kind of obvious, even though he looked like any other baby?
Yeah, and I love telling the story. So, and again, this shows just really how much we didn't know what we didn't know.
Hmm.
He was born 5 weeks premature. He was small, obviously, and there was some of that. He was what we defined as colicky when he came home, and
Right.
fussy, that type of thing. But I was a teacher, and I actually worked in more younger, like early childhood environments for the most part. My wife was a middle school teacher, but still, we were in education. We had an
Right.
idea about kids, but it
Right.
was our first child. We were new parents. So I recall that at his 18-month checkup with his pediatrician, where they kind of give you the battery of questions, and that's where they kind of let you know that something's off. So one of the questions she asked was, is your child speaking? And the answer was, well, no. Now, again, when we talk about speaking, we're not talking about necessarily having a conversation, but it is something where there's really not a lot of babbling or any of that, kind of interplay going on. So she said, well, what you want to do is you want to go across the street and you want to go over to the professional building and you have him see a speech therapist. And her literal words were, I don't know what they do, but they play with the kids and they make them talk. So we said, okay, we'll go play with the speech therapist. And then we tried that. and he still didn't talk. And then we had his hearing tested, and then we looked at some other things. And in Illinois, where we live, they have something called early intervention services, where through the state, if the child is under the age of 3, you can get some therapist specialists come to the home. And again, they're not going to diagnose anything, but they'll give an assessment and see, kind of where he is. So we had him see a neuropsych right before he turned 3, and then that's when he was diagnosed with, at the time, what was called pervasive developmental disorder, which is like autism, but it wasn't specifically autism. Now everything is blanket autism. So there are some things that just they aren't a label anymore. Much like Asperger's isn't. It's all just kind of straight autism. So that's how he's defined, and that's how we identify him as. But again, I can tell you that, from that point on, we tried everything for our child. If there was something we could throw against the wall, we did that, for the most part. And I would say that, it's an interesting journey because, not only did we see that, okay, there is no magic bullet, there is no one thing that's going to cure him. There are definitely some things that can help support him. But again, also the flip side of it is, as parents, even with one child, we found ourselves very overwhelmed very
Mhm.
quickly, and the need for help and support in those support systems really became evident, especially early on.
So is this I guess, a generation ago, before we were aware of these things, you would have just, you had a trouble, you had a troubled child or something like that. Is it, I mean, is it now, does every parent in this experience they would know something, they would have a diagnosis or know specifically, or are there still places in the country where that it might not have been diagnosed?
To be honest, I can't tell you how much that would have differentiated whether it's a time issue or geography issue. What I can
Mhm.
speak to, though, is, I feel like, we lived in the north suburbs of Chicago. We had pretty good doctors and specialists. We
Right.
had relatively good school systems, but again, that doesn't mean that every school system is the right fit or can really support your child. But I felt like, we probably had the best that we could get
Hmm.
given our location and circumstances and all of it. Now, again, one of the issues that you see is that if, let's say, you live in more of a rural area or an area which just doesn't have that kind of structure or those services, it could be something where, your child will suffer if they don't have all of the available therapists, or if those therapists are not close. Or if it's something where maybe there's a specific type of a specialist or doctor that might really help support your child that maybe you just can't access because, again, you're not in living, outside of a major metro area. So I would tell you that we pretty much had everything that we needed at our
Hmm.
fingertips. But again, the struggle with families like ours is you can try 100 things, and you have to eventually surrender the fact that none of them may work, right? And
Right.
that doesn't mean you don't try it, and that doesn't mean that some progress is better than no progress, but it also means that you kind of have to come to this place of surrender where you say, you know what, this is still my child. Right.
Right.
And in my son's case, yeah, he's going to need help the rest of his life. But that doesn't take away from my role as his dad, or, his role as my son, and obviously that relationship that we still have.
Help give the audience an idea of how many families are struggling with autistic kids who are far enough into the spectrum that they need special help. Maybe not as much as intense help as your son does, but who are identified as autistic and need to be uh, have extra assistance.
Sure. And again, I'm not the absolute data miner machine
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
kind of a thing. But just to speak loosely, so and also in my day job, where, I believe it or not, I actually train churches of all denominations to accept people with disabilities. And many times people, whether it's in those environments or just in general, some people might say, I don't see disabled people, or, that's not my world, that's not my kids, and I don't know anyone like that. Well, here's the thing. The World Health Organization identifies people with disabilities as the largest minority in the world. It's over 1 billion people. Okay. So that's not me saying it. That's not anybody I work for with. That's World Health saying it, right? So it's the largest minority in the world. And then if you look at autism specifically, because that's all disabilities, right?
Hmm.
If you
Right.
look at autism specifically, you're talking about, the last numbers, and it might be more, but it's, at least 1 in 50 and 1 in 44 boys, right? So that means, and that's for some who don't, really have an awareness of, is that good or bad or whatever. It used to be 1 in 200, it used to be 1 in 1,000, 30 years ago, and so on and so forth. So,
Hmm.
and we can argue about why those numbers are bigger or not, and that's its own rabbit hole, I think. But, the thing to just be aware of is that, yes, this is very prevalent. You have kids, and again, coming out of the school environments and being an educator, you have folks who, if they have an autism diagnosis, and I know plenty of adults like this too, adults who are incredibly gifted and talented and manage their life just fine, but they're still diagnosed. They're still on the spectrum. Likewise for kids. Well, there's
Sure.
nothing wrong or different with that kid. Well, yeah, but he's still on the spectrum, meaning that there may be some things that he needs an accommodation for in the learning environment. There may be some things that he can't handle sensory wise. There may be some things that, need to be adjusted for the quality of his daily living, right? And so these are the things that I think as a society, I think we're getting better at being aware of. And the reality is, it's like anyone else. We all have things that make us crazy, or things
Yeah.
that soothe us or calm us down, and that's all great. But I think we need to have a little bit more, maybe a hyper awareness. And I think the society is now finally moving in this direction to say, you know what, some people are just not going to process the same way. And that doesn't make them wrong. That doesn't make them broken. That doesn't make them, of no value. It just means that they need maybe something different or a little extra support. And you know what? There are people who identify with disabilities, even in the advocacy world, who are doing amazing things and amazing work. But if we're just going to put them in a box and say they have a diagnosis and now they can't do anything, that's absolutely not the case, right?
Yeah.
So, and then of course, being a parent, you always have to open up your mind to, okay, yes, my child is limited. What can they do? Because they can
Yeah.
absolutely do something.
Yeah. Well, the difficult question, and maybe one that sounds really ignorant, but I'm sure a lot of parents have this feeling that uh, how much accommodation should be available, and how many people self-diagnose themselves as having autistic because they are, and I'm not saying that a lot of people do that. Enough people do it, probably that people are aware of it, that who want to take on that mantle of, I'm special, I'm neurodiverse. I'm thinking differently than everybody, so I have to have a special accommodation. Uh, does that even show up in your world, or is that kind of neurosis completely different than what you're dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, I would tell you that, like, my experience with my son, and with whether it's
Yeah, it sounds like,
kids I've taught, or even
yeah,
adults that I work with, and especially through my regular day job, you're talking about folks who it's pretty evident,
yeah,
yes, that they need support. Now, what I will say to your point, though, is what's fascinating is there is so much research now on neurodiversity as a whole. And I'll give you a
right,
great example. I have a partner down in Georgia. She's a woman, and her and her husband identify as a married couple with neurodiversity, meaning the husband identifies being on the spectrum.
yeah,
And, it was something that they didn't necessarily know when they got married, but then they figured out that there was something there. And so what's fascinating is kind of the work they're doing. And I know I've talked to the husband, and he even has his own podcast that I've been on too. But it kind of talking about, okay, well, let's really unpack this and see what's going on. Because on the one hand, yes, we all have our little
right,
idiosyncrasies and
right,
whatever that makes us who we are. But legitimately, when there's, let's say, breakdowns in communication in a relationship, in a marriage, that are pretty, they become common in terms of, okay, I'm seeing that we keep having the same issue when we talk about this, or when something is said this way or whatever. And even for myself, and I don't identify with a disability, but what I have learned, though, is, even for me, there are ways that I communicate, and my wife has pointed this out to me, where, you know what, I said it to you like 3 times, and what happened? And it's like, okay, am I just being a dumb guy here? Well, no, it's not that. And again, men, again, do have different wavelengths of hearing things and receiving and kind of keeping things in their head. And sometimes they go into what's called the nothing box, which is sometimes guys just kind of not thinking about nothing at all.
Right.
But it's kind of an awareness to say, okay, well, listen, maybe I do process a little differently. Maybe something is, a bit more specific in terms of how I need to hear it or, how I need to retain it kind of thing. So it's fascinating stuff, but in terms of, what has been my kind of experience, we're talking about folks who absolutely I identify as having a
Yeah.
disability. It's pretty obvious and stated, and you kind of know exactly for the
Right.
most part, where you might
Yeah.
need to help support them.
Okay. So you are do you advocate politically or in any other way, or is your advocacy really to support dads who are in the situation, their relationship, their how to take care of their child, how to maintain their own lives, or
Yeah,
maybe all of it?
Yeah, no, and that's a great question. And I know when we use the word advocate, some people, think do you work in schools or again, do you work
Right.
politically? And I use that word because it's kind of an easily identifiable word, like, oh, I get it, you help people with this, right? And
Right.
so in my case, most of my advocacy is with families, meaning that I speak to families, whether it's through my writing, whether it's through my presentations or, doing interviews like this kind of a thing, and then even more specifically to dads. And so I kind of see myself as a hub, where if there are specifically guys, for example, that are needing help support, there are a variety of ways that I can get them connected. So, if it's someone who's local in the Chicago area, I run in-person meetups for special needs dads. You
Yeah.
want to meet and hang out. No one is going to put you under a microscope and ask your life story if you don't want to. And that's probably most of them. But if you want to hang out and be around guys that understand your road better than someone else, great. There are national organizations that I'm connected to. One great one that I always love talking about is Special Fathers Network. So Special Fathers Network is based in Chicago. It's a national organization. And for guys who need to get connected with another dad so that you can talk to someone who understands what you're dealing with. Okay. This is a great one because one, if you are a guy who doesn't mind being in a group, there are mastermind groups, and that's kind of a pretty popular thing now in terms of being
Yeah.
like a
Sure.
support group. And so it has that model, that structure, and there's several of them, and they're all virtual. So I had been part of that for a couple of years, and there's guys from all over the country, and you can get matched up with that. If you want to be in more of a local version of that, there are more local versions, depending on your community around the country. If you don't like groups, and you're like, nah, I just want to talk to one person. There's a mentorship program. You can get connected with one mentor, whether it's someone in your area or maybe similar demographics to your family or child, et cetera. And you can get connected with that person and then have someone to talk to. The point being is that you're not alone, right? And then if you don't like talking to anybody, at least not right away, there's a awesome podcast series. And anybody who's done anything with disability, and it's not all men, it's mostly men, it's mostly dads, is on there, and there's a YouTube channel, there's a virtual conference once a year. So there's stuff you can get plugged into, and that's one example of a great organization I always talk about. So what I like to do with dads is I say, okay, where are you at? What is going on? If I can talk to you, great. I'm more than happy to be the guy to do that. But then, if I need to pass you along to someone for whatever reason, I can probably find someone to, get you connected with. But if a dad were to reach out to me and say, look, I got to talk to somebody, I would never say no to a dad who just wanted to talk, right? And maybe I'm not the guy ultimately that they need to be connected with or depending on the resources they need. But I absolutely like, again, kind of being that initial kind of contact into this world to say, look, if you're not plugged in, if you don't have anyone to talk to, if you don't have any of these supports, let's help you figure it out and let me see what I can do for you.
Yeah, I was listening to one of the other podcasts you were on. And you were talking about how you tried to start one of these on your own and ran into the roadblock. A lot of us coaches who work with dads do is that there's initial interest or there's awareness, and in your case, there's probably a lot of things going on at home and a real need for something, but the interaction with other men doesn't happen as naturally, or it's hard to keep it going. Why do you think that even in the middle of, a crisis like this, where you think, if your sports team is losing or what, it's something like that, you're all in all the time and you're talking about it, but when it comes to this, it's hard. This or any other types of parenting things, dads have trouble, or they don't see the need of this kind of communication support.
So I think it's a few things, and I'll go back a little bit to my story when I first started out, because again, I was a guy when my son, when he was first diagnosed and we were struggling, and even before that we are trying to figure out what this is. I was really lost. Now
Right.
typically the dynamic you see in most marriages with this is mom is usually the one who kind of takes control, and mom is the one who, and we love our moms, our autism mama bears. My son's mom is great at this still, but they're the ones who, they make the appointments, they find the doctors, wrestle with the insurance companies, figure out the therapist, do all that stuff. And in my son's mom's case, she was great at that. She was very type A, very controlling. She was locked in, and okay. Well, here's the thing. Most dads in that role, then, what do you do? Well, most guys throw themselves into their work because they can't really control anything. They can't fix anything, but I can work and I can make sure we can pay for these things. The problem in my case was I was never the breadwinner. My wife always made more money than me, regardless of whatever that gap was. So I'm not the breadwinner. I just can't write a blank check. You're handling all this other stuff. What
It's your
what do I
role.
even do? I what's my value here? So there's a few things that happen. One, there's so much guilt and shame that gets thrown into a marriage and with parenting with this, because the first thing a parent does is, this one of our faults? Did you do something you
Yeah,
shouldn't have done? Did
certainly.
I do something? Did we both do something? And then as you're trying to raise the child again, and kind of you lean into the things maybe you're good at or the things that you're expected to do. So the moms are going to handle a lot of those, finer details and things. What do the dads do? If when dads start to check out because I don't feel my value or purpose, I don't know how to raise this child, and especially where there's a male child, there's a lot of that shame too. Because look, you have a boy, you have a son. Boy, I thought my kid was going to grow up and they were going to play sports like me, or I can take him
Right.
fishing or hunting, or we're going to go do
Right.
this, and then that doesn't happen. Now, here's the thing, that's still your child. So even like in my son's case, what I had to learn, I had to learn, first of all, my value was not tied to my pocketbook, number one. But number two, I had to learn that my value was just being dad, right? So, there were a lot of times, and I know early in his life, I actually would take him a lot on the weekends so that my wife could, get a break. And we'd go off and we'd just go do fun stuff together.
Hmm.
And it was always a different park or a different zoo or, whatever. And we would just have fun exploring. And, but it was still about us. And yeah, it looked different. It wasn't exactly the same interaction you would have with a typical child, but we were still out, we were still having fun, we were still being dad and son. And even with, using that sports analogy, yeah, my son's never going to play sports for several reasons, but you know what? He loves watching it on TV. We can watch it together. We can pass the ball around a little bit. His motor skills are not the best, but when we had a hoop in the driveway, if I took a shot and whether I made it or not, he'd be clapping because he just thought it was cool. I threw the ball up in the air. So again, that's the kind of connection that we have to find. But the problem with the guys, finding and being willing to be vulnerable is for everything that I just laid out. So many guys can't get to that place where they can connect with their child or find the value in their marriage or really understand, like, okay, what is my place here? And it's just a lot easier to check out. And in some cases, marriages go on for years, and we're just not going to get divorced. We're just going to make this work, whatever it looks like. It's not healthy. It's not what it could be, but it is what it is, as opposed to really leaning in. And so guys have to get to a place where they say, you know what, I'm struggling. This is not what I want it to be for me, for my kid, for my marriage. Let me go find some guys. And when I started out, I had nobody. I had friends who would tell me, I love you, but I got nothing for you.
Right. Right.
I'd lean into older
Must be very
guys.
lonely.
It was, and I'm very transparent when I say, we went through a season of life, where I specifically wrestled with this, and this was kind of where I had my big aha moment. But, quite frankly, I was suicidal. and I mean, and when I say that, I don't say that, that's not a throwaway line. I mean, I specifically had thought about it, had a plan, said, maybe this is where it's going to go. And luckily it didn't. But a big piece of that was getting the right support. And that support came from some different places. And it's not going to look the same for everybody. But what I always emphasize, and for me, my best advice for guys, and really for anybody, for families too, but I go to a number one little a, number one little b, right? Using my teacher brain, former teacher brain.
Mhm.
So, number one a for me is my faith. I identify as a Christian. My faith is the foundation of my support. If I did not have that, none of this other stuff would matter
Mhm.
from my point of view. If you are listening to this, that's great, but that's not me. I'm not a Christian. I'm not religious. I'm not this. Okay, guess what? 1B is community. You must have community. You must have people who understand you, that you can talk to, that you can relate to. Could be one person, could be 10, whatever it is, right? And I tell guys this too. Hey, look, if you're hearing me, you got no one to talk to, reach out to me. Again, as I said, I'm happy to talk to you. I might, pass you on to someone who maybe can help you more, or, whatever you're needing. But I'm always happy to have that conversation, because again, I know what it's like to not have anyone that gets it at all. And when you're on an island like that, and again, people are well-meaning, they try to support you, they try to reach out, look, we love you, we care about you, but if they don't get it, then they really don't know exactly what you're needing in that moment. And for a lot of guys too, it really is a perspective shift, right? And it's a big shift. It's really like a paradigm shift. It's okay, I'm not going to be the parent I thought I was going to be. My child is not going to be who I thought they were going to be. What does this look like now? What's my identity? What's theirs? What's my identity with my child? And all of it. So it's big questions, but again, that's why I harp on, don't do it alone. You got to get somebody. You don't want 10 people, get one, but get somebody. You must have community.
So did you experience any loss of friends and the community you had because there was any kind of it's not like prejudice or discrimination, but more like I can't deal with your thing, or dealing with your son is too complicated. I'm just gonna passively move on and let our friendship go.
There was nothing stated
Right,
like look,
right, right.
you've got a kid with this stuff now, and now we're just not going to be friends. It wasn't that, and I mean, there is stuff out there that happens like that, and I have talked to people who have had that experience. But for me, it was more, and again, this is the problem that happens with families like ours, is that unfortunately life takes over. And one of the big reasons why you have such a high divorce rate, I'm not going to quote the specific numbers because I know they change, but it's exponentially higher for families of disability. Problem is that you get so overwhelmed taking care of that child, or in some cases, families have more than one with a disability. And there's a hyper focus on that child. We have to care for the child, to figure out where we're getting stuff, how we're taking care of this. Siblings, and when there's siblings in the family, typical siblings, they get ignored, or I mean, and maybe not totally ignored, but there's more of a focus on the personality than the other siblings. And then, of course, things like self-care, which I really harp on, go out the window. I can't take time for myself. I've got to worry about the kid. I've got to worry about my spouse. Well, what am I going to do? And then you don't take time for yourself in terms of being a married couple. And pretty soon everything just disintegrates. And so what I think I found was it's hard to have natural sustained friendships even with people I've known for years, because you're so overwhelmed all the time. And I think we went through a stretch, and it was probably a good few years where, like there were a lot of people that I had known for years that I just kind of stopped talking to. And again, it wasn't because they did anything wrong. It was just, it was life. And then for myself and my wife at the time, we had to figure out, okay, well, how do we make friends with people, right? And so it was something where, we eventually we moved from the town where my son was born, to we're all in the suburbs of Chicago, but we moved from one suburb to another. We got into a community with a much better school district, and a lot of the families in the neighborhood also had kids with disabilities, so we could connect with folks in the neighborhood and through the school. And then, of course, I started, developing things over time too. So we got plugged into a few things where we had people that we could kind of lean on and start to, talk to that way. And now, I'm extremely grateful because I've got people, I've got guys that I talk to that I've become friends with in this world that, I text almost every day. And maybe some people that I don't talk to as often,
Mhm.
but you know what? I've got people all over the country. If I need to talk to somebody, I can always find someone. And I think that that's the point of it. So it's not about look how cool I am. It's, you know what? I had a gap in my life where I had nothing. Right. And that didn't work. And so at least now, and when you go through, the other thing too is that when you go through hard seasons in life, because I had gone through the one season where, I was suicidal and trying to figure it out. My wife and I almost separated, but we didn't. But my wife and I years later actually wound up getting divorced. And, I was lucky in that when that actually did happen, I had support built in because of the relationships I had made, because of the people that had kind of been there and done that and walked that road, or people that maybe had a specific skill set or something that, helped me kind of navigate that whole part of the journey too. So again, some of it is getting the help you need in the moment, right? But it's also about, as you make these relationships, build these relationships, be intentional with these relationships. Not only it's not only what you give, but it's also what you get back. Because when you need it to be there, ideally,
Right.
hopefully it is. I know for me it was. So
Yeah, well, the masterminds in these kind of groups are really invaluable in all kinds of different circumstances, and usually don't cost anything or minimal costs, and really valuable. Are there other things that dads should know if they're early on in this journey, like they have a toddler who's on the spectrum and is going to be need to be helped educated in a different way? Anything that wouldn't be obvious in this case?
Mhm. Well, so you don't. Here's my one piece of advice. Here's the thing. What's remarkable about people and kids specifically is that, a child could start out life with maybe a particular profile, but then in 5 years they're a totally different person, right? I mean, everyone's development is kind of their own. But what I would say is make sure that one, you're asking the questions, right? Make sure that you're, of your pediatrician, and then if your pediatrician recommends you talk to someone, and go talk to someone. And again, and like in the story that I told, okay, it doesn't always mean they're going to answer your questions or have a totally an answer for you, but at least you're collecting information. So if you've got concerns, it doesn't hurt to ask. It doesn't hurt to collect information. You don't have to make yourself crazy necessarily, but you want to make sure that you're understanding, okay, what are we looking at here? And again, when it's so critical, like in that age range, you just mentioned, because on the one hand, again, kids have time to, develop and grow, and by the time they're in first, second, third grade, again, it's like there was never a problem. At the same time, though, if you don't address it because you assume, and I know in a lot of parents in our role, and even us, there was a legitimately part of us that said, okay, let's see what happens, kind of thing. Like we still did our work, but there's let's see what happens. Maybe this will just kind of grow
Yeah,
and develop,
you're hoping you want it, you don't want it to be true. I'm sure you like, and
right.
then you stick your head in the sand.
Right. Yeah. Or like, in the case of asking, the two grandmothers. We had one grandmother who was very good about providing information and helping looking things up and going to doctor's appointments. And then of course there was my mom, the other grandma, who said, well, he's a boy. He's not going
Right,
to talk right
right.
away. John didn't start talking until he was 3.5. And I'm like, really? Like, okay. So I mean, and I turned out fine. But again, the
Yeah,
point
right.
is that, you know, by 3.5, you would expect that they've already been talking for a while. So the fact is that it doesn't hurt to ask the questions. And don't be afraid to ask the questions. And remember, you're just getting information. It's not putting a label on your child. It's not saying this is your this is the trajectory of your child's life. It just means that you are prepared as a parent and you have as much information as possible moving forward.
Yeah, that's really good advice because I think we all want our kids to be Nobel Prize winners and NFL pro athletes and all the rest, and that's just not the reality for most of them. And that there is always that going to be that confrontation between fantasy of your marriage, fantasy of your kids, and everything else versus the reality, and you have to kind of work through that and with the best of intentions and still ask the questions and figure out where you are at any given point. Wow. That's quite a challenge for you, and I guess I'm just really grateful that you became a father of a special needs child at a time when more resources were out there, that people weren't like hiding things or writing your son off because of the challenges that nobody understood. I mean, we're in a different place, luckily, now even versus just a generation ago.
Yeah, and that's very true. And you know what? It's interesting when I think about my son, and I'm 50, so I'm a product of the 70s and the 80s. But I remember as a kid, I didn't have learning difficulties per se, but I know there were areas that I did struggle. There were areas I was very good with, and some areas that I was
Hmm.
absolutely not good with. And I think about, you know, had I grown up when my son grew up, I probably would have had every advantage just because those kind of supports and things are just naturally there now. Whereas when I was a kid,
Yeah.
it was, well, just put your head down and focus more. Well, what does that do? So I think what was great about again, the environment that our son landed into. We had enough resources available. We had at least the support we needed. And of course we built more support around us. But again, this is also where I tell folks and encourage them, because they could be hearing this. And again, you could be in a major market where you've got all these things available. You could be somewhere in the middle of nowhere and you have to drive 1 or 2 hours to get to anything. So, but again, that's where, again, community is so important. And so much of this is virtual, right? And so you can accomplish a lot of this. Obviously, you can accomplish a lot of things medically and that type of stuff as well. But that support is out there and it's very easily available. So
Yeah.
don't forget to make that a point.
Great. Well, thanks for coming on and educating us a little bit. I imagine most of the fathers who are listening to this, who are already in this world, probably are hyper aware. But maybe there is something, if it touches just one person who doesn't know there are these community resources out there, or could benefit from contacting you. I think we've done our done our job for today. Is there anything that you would say to dads who don't have kids with disabilities, that we should know how to be more respectful or understanding or empathetic or helpful? Is there anything in that area that would be helpful for other dads?
So to answer that question, sometimes people ask me, so like, what has your son taught you, right? Like,
Hmm.
how are
No.
you different raising a child? And the first thing that I go to is that I'm a kinder person.
Hmm.
I'm a person who now is kinder because of the experience raising my son. Because prior to this, again, I really didn't have a lot of experience with disability, even in education. I was never a special ed teacher, at least not early on. So, for me, it was okay. Well, not that I'm going to try to go out of my way to hurt someone's feelings, but at the
Right.
same time, you kind of have a wall, you kind of have a filter, and okay, this is just not my world. I'm not going into it. But now it allows me to say, you know what? These are all people like all of us. They all have value, and let's also respect not only their journey, but again the journey of these parents, just like you're kind of pointing out here. So what I would say is always just when you come into an environment, maybe you have a child that's having a meltdown in a restaurant and you're trying to have a quiet meal, or maybe in the movie theater or the grocery store or whatever. Remember that child more often than not can't control it. And that family is doing their best to try to help that child control it in the moment. But also too, and we've had, I've had the experiences of people, saying not too nice things in restaurants that
Right. Yeah.
essentially amounted to, well, maybe you just shouldn't bring him out in public.
Right. Right.
Well, that's not okay, because guess what? My child needs to be out in public, and you know what? It might take my child years to figure out how to do this in a way that's manageable. but we're not going to get there unless, we break a few eggs and we're in a situation where, okay, they're having a meltdown and we just kind of have to process it. Maybe it means we leave early. I can tell you I've had plenty of those instances where leave a restaurant early, maybe you didn't
Yeah.
finish eating, maybe you had a rush, or wherever you were, something didn't work, you had to leave. But if you're in an environment where that's going on, do that mental check of, okay,
Yeah.
I'm not just going to assume they're bad parents, or I'm
Right.
just not going to assume that's just a bad kid. Hey, they probably got something going on. It's okay. And I mean, if you really feel called, and you want to even ask somebody, hey, can I help, or is there anything I can do? I mean, and that's fine. I mean, most parents would be very appreciative that you would acknowledge them. Not saying that's something that you have to do, but at the same
Yeah.
time,
Right.
know that those families are already carrying enough guilt and shame and all of these bad emotions. And again, not that they don't love their kids
Yeah.
either, but being in those environments, it's always a pressure cooker for families like ours. So as
Yeah.
much as you can help kind of, bring the temperature down and let people know, you know what, we're on your side.
Yeah.
It's okay. And your child can be here. And if your child is having a bad day, then just please let us know maybe if we can help.
Yeah, empathy is so important, and also the reminder to
Absolutely.
be empathetic. Even though those of us who think we're fairly good at that, you need a reminder like every half hour to keep you on track and keep you thinking that kind of positive way because it's needed, right? I mean, in all kinds of other situations, not just for yours, but all kinds of other walks of life. Well, John,
Yeah.
thanks a lot for joining us. People can find you at johnfella.com. So it's johnfela.com, and that a whole bunch of your podcasts are there as a first resources just to understand some of the background, and then some of the links into your other resources community and one-on-one conversations.
Yeah, and the website is a great hub to go to. You can find me on all of the different socials as well. Just my disclaimers we mentioned at the beginning of the show. Some of my content is under my previous last name, which is Felageller, Felageller. So you'll find most of the stuff on the website, but my friend who's my webmaster doesn't get everything on there all the time right away. So if you want to just punch in John Felageller, you'll get a bunch of stuff too. But one way or another, you can find me for sure.
Yeah, that's good to know. That's one of the same person. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, great. Paul Baines with GreatDad.com. You can find my coaching at GreatDad.com/go, including a free course on gratitude, which I'm sure is part of this process too, is being grateful for what you have. You have a 16-year-old son, and it sounds like you've had a great relationship with him and done all kinds of fun things, and that's what it's all about. So,
Absolutely.
okay, until next time, stay strong.